Welcome to the show, Education in the Community. I am your host, Rev Robert Mcknight, and we are honored to have as a co-host joining us today, Miss Lora Sall. And we're going to be discussing hope in history, or the history of hope. And we want to ask you to pull up a chair, to call a neighbor, and to let them know that the show is on. Thank you, Ms. Sall, for joining us in the hope of history, in the hope of history. And we're going to approach this in the context of this being African American History Month. And so in acknowledgement of setting aside this month to honor all of the contributions of those who have gone on ahead of us, our foreparents, our ancestors, we want to look upon the impact that their contribution, the ultimate contributions for many, made on our behalf in order that we can come into your homes today. We were sharing, Ms. Sall, before the show that Dr. Wyatt T. Walker, who was in the inner circle with Dr. King, he pastored a church out of New York. And it was Dr. Wyatt T. Walker who said that if you rob a people of their history, you take away their hope. And then we followed that up with Dr. Cornel West, of whom many of you are familiar with. And Dr. Cornel West also made reference to that same fact, or we can say truth, based upon the history and experience of Africans in America, that when you take away that group's history, you take away their collective and many times individual hope. But Dr. West said that the problems confronting African Americans then in the 20th century was not one of oppression, but he said the problem, our greatest problem, was the loss of hope and the absence of meaning, which is merely to say that if you have no hope, you are living a meaningless existence. And I want to recommend to you, if you can, go on Amazon.com. You won't be able to find it in a bookstore because it is out of print. One of the greatest novels that I've read is The Nubian, N-U-B-I-A-N. The author is a young man out of Atlanta, Georgia, by the name of Dwayne Smith. And The Nubian is a story about an uncle who's leading his nephew through a rites of passage. And in there, he shares with him, and I'm going to read this as a direct quote. Derek, who's the main character, says to Manny, he says, "A man without an appreciation for his history has no identity. Without an identity, he can have no direction. Without direction, there can be no purpose. And without purpose, there can be no freedom." And he goes on to say, and without freedom, one cannot live as a man. And he emphasizes that because he's taken Manny through this rites of passage that would lead him from his boyhood into his manhood. But where he says that where there is no freedom, you cannot live as a man. Where there is no freedom, you cannot have a universal or holistic existence if you don't have your freedom. Because what is life without freedom? And of course, he's talking about something deeper than political freedom. What are your thoughts about that?
Wow, that says a whole lot. It reminds me of the times when much of our efforts to remove ourselves from the oppression that we were experiencing years ago, especially. It reminds me of how close we were as a people in order to continue to lift each other up and to go for those hopeful patterns that we wanted to go after. And oftentimes it was in our churches, it was in our neighborhoods, because you ran into the black-owned stores, the black-owned businesses. You had to go to a black doctor and a black dentist, and black folks communicated with each other in a different way during this time when you shared information. I can remember my aunt and my mother and other people in the neighborhood actually teaching cooking and teaching sewing and teaching the children in the neighborhood various things, in spite of those things that were trying to be taken away from us. There was still something in us that I think originated in our faith communities that helped us stay closer to each other in spite of what other people were trying to take from us. And so as I'm listening to this, and I know how much we have lost over the years, you know, just being enslaved has really removed us from our original knowledge of self.
Wow.
And now we are faced with trying to go back and learn about our history and learn who we really are. But there's still something that's very present inside of us that keeps us hoping for a change, that keeps us going after one another, that closeness that we heard about in our church or in our neighborhoods, and oftentimes in our homes, depending on where our parents came from. There's still something embedded in us that is hopeful, that wants more. Even though there's a lot of hopelessness in our neighborhoods, there's still a lot of hope inside of individuals.
I like that. And so you said that this hope is on the inside of us. That is because we have never been completely severed from our culture. It is dormant, that desire now lies dormant within us. But who you are is embedded in your DNA. We might be in conscious denial of who we are, but that creates this denial, a sense of restlessness. The late, I want to say great because he was intellectually, as a person, culturally, Dr. Asa Hilliard, brilliant scholar in terms of living in this state of denial. He says that denial of reality is one of the leading conditions that will cause you to spend some time on a psychologist's couch. Okay. It's one of the leading symptoms of mental illness. Mm-hmm. And so, because we're living in a state of denial when it comes to who we are, I never will forget, I heard Ron Johnson say in a lecture about the rites of passage, that if one does not understand their culture, they will never understand themselves. Mm-hmm. And so there is this subconscious longing to know who we are. And in that longing is our hope. Our history provides us with this sense of hope. Mm-hmm. From whence we came, of all of the thousands of ships that came to this country and the so-called New World that left African shores, our ancestors, our foreparents, did not board them ships alone, mm-hmm. but they brought with them a sense of their culture. Mm-hmm. They brought over with them ancient wisdom and knowledge that allowed them to endure the horrors of the Middle Passage.
Mm-hmm. That's why I know even today we're going to be all right.
Of course.
Because those that survived that Middle Passage and made it here and then survived all the abuse and all the years of Jim Crow and everything else since then, we are descendants of the best of the best. We are descendants of the strongest
yes.
of those that were taken and brought
yes.
here. Okay? And that, to me, is what inspires my hope.
Yes.
And that's what keeps me looking forward, knowing that we are connected to our Creator.
That's
and
right.
knowing that we are connected to those who survived.
Yes.
You put all of that together, we have nothing but possibilities. And that's where hope lies. Okay?
We have nothing but hope. Because you see, one of the reasons they were able to survive, those who made it, mm-hmm. was that they were hoping that wherever they were on their way to, they didn't know what it was, but their hope was it would be better than the conditions that prevailed in the hold of that ship. Mm-hmm. And so this hope to better themselves provided them with an inner strength and courage mm-hmm. to survive.
Yeah.
And then pass it on to the next generation and the next generation that allow the people, our people, to go through such a cruel and inhumane form of human bondage, mm-hmm. unknown in the annals of all human history.
Yes.
But we survived to rise from the lowest level in a society mm-hmm. to the highest level that this society has to offer, which is the presidency. Mm. Because of that hope, you cannot take away a people's hope mm-hmm. and expect them to survive. There are 3 states that people exist in. One is helplessness, a terrible thing to feel helpless. Mm-hmm. The other is a state of powerlessness. And the worst state is a state of hopelessness. Mm-hmm. Because as long as you have your hope, you can regain your power. And once you're able to regain your power, now you're in a position not only to help yourself, but those who are like you that have been in a similar position as yours. But if you lose your hope, there's nothing you can do.
Now, oftentimes people say that things have been so bad in our communities, with the killings of our young people, with the killings of the black man and woman, with all the challenges that go on within our community, not being able to find jobs, having no money, not being able to own property, children going off on their own and no contact with their family members, or not growing up knowing the kind of closeness that we grew up with in our neighborhoods. Oftentimes people would say there's no hope. I talked to some of my friends who have been teaching for 25 and 30 years, only to find themselves just becoming disciplinarians versus teachers today in the school system, and feeling like they have to deal with children coming in and threatening their lives versus learning and wanting to learn. And so for them, I've often heard them say, there's no hope. But when you believe, when you have a belief that God is real and never sleeps, there's always hope. That this too will pass. And in spite of what people have tried to do to us and with us, against us, we're still here. And we're still surviving in spite of. Okay? And to me, that's hope. That is hope. And that's what you have to get to, where you really see how important your view of self and your view of the community and your fellow man, and how that continues that hope forward. And we have to get to that place where we need each other, and we support each other, and we continue to lift each other up in hope. Okay? And I think that's where our saving grace will be. Okay?
Now, alluding back to something you said earlier in your opening comments, that your parents, grandparents, played a strategic role in teaching you about culture, about yourself, the proper way to go about doing things. It came from the home. And then you also said what was not taught in the home, you learned in the church. And it just substantiates what the late Dr. Eric Lincoln said when he said that in days past and gone, it was the black family, the black school, and the black church that joined hands together to rear up our children. But there has been a breach between these three dominant institutions in any society, where there's no longer this connection between the black family and the black school, because there's no longer any black schools. And there's definitely a breach between the schools and the church. And so where is a young child to gain this knowledge? Optimistically, they send them off to school, hoping that they will gain some knowledge of who they are. Because you've been miseducated if you go through this system and leave without some knowledge of self. Because knowledge of self is the most important and the greatest knowledge in the world. Is that you leave with some knowledge of self. Now, if you leave without this knowledge of self, of course, just according to the quotes that we shared, if you take away or rob a people of their history, you take away their hope. Even though they go through and matriculate successfully these institutions, even of higher learning, if they come out with no hope, that is, no knowledge of self, they're not going to have any real hope. They're still going to be dependent upon the very same forces that oppress them over all of the years. And in the words of the late Dr. Francis Cress Welsing, you become then an agent of your own oppression. Mm-hmm. Malcolm said that the slave master will not teach you knowledge of self, because then there cannot be a master-slave relationship. Because in order to be a free person, you have to free your mind. You can't free your mind if you don't know who you are.
Well, one thing we have to remember, they have never tried to teach us who we are, nor will they ever be able to completely teach us who we are. It's like there was a school in Wisconsin, and it was an all-black school, but the state of Wisconsin had on the books that 70% of the teachers at any school had to be Caucasian. Now, how can a Caucasian teacher teach an all-black school about their history when most of these teachers had no knowledge of the history, because it was falsified to them just like it was to us? Eliminated, changed, twisted, and the information that was out there was not the truth. And so what we have to do today is what we had to do then and what we've had to do since then. You have to learn how to learn your own history, start doing your own research, teach yourself, and not just verbalize our history. We have to be a living example of our history. The love and the closeness we show to one another has to be real. It has to be an active demonstration of that love, not just telling somebody I love you. And therefore, if our children's parents are not available to go to that school and be at that school to advocate for their child, and you are, you should be advocating for all of those little kids that's up in that school, not just yours. And you should be one that's vocalizing to everybody that I'm watching out for all of these children, because they all are part of me. And then the children are feeling the love from not only their parents, but from the community, the people that are around them. And then they are learning because they're getting older. And then they can start showing the next generation how it is that we are close to each other in spite of what we've been through and what they try to continue to put us through.
Yes, and something that you said reminds me of a personal experience. You said that no one other outside of the African American culture can teach you about your culture. They can, but it's a rare breed, maybe one in a million. The first instructor, then at Grove Street, later Merritt College, to teach African American history, I had an opportunity to sit at their feet for 3 quarters, was Mr. George Dascarolas, who would tell you quickly, I'm not white, I'm a Greek. He had a sense of who he was. He understood his culture so he could appreciate others. If you don't know your own culture and value it, you cannot respect the culture of another person. Mr. Dascarolas is one of the greatest teachers of African American history that I had an opportunity to sit under, to study with, and then become a part of the faculty. He recommended me to become a part of the African American Studies Department because he moved on. But he taught that course with the approval both of Huey Newton and Bobby Seale. And when they found someone else, it was Dr. Cecilia Arrington, he said, it's time for me to step down. It is better that someone that is a descendant of all of the things that I've been teaching you, teach you, because you have that physical identification there. And that's one of the things that you need. It's not many people that reach that level of consciousness. You see, you cannot learn in a hostile environment. I don't mean this in terms of bullying. I mean an intellectual hostile environment. It must be a loving and caring environment. And I don't care who stands before the class.
Yes.
But the student cannot learn in that kind of environment. They must become one with the environment and one with the teacher. You have to understand that children are shrewd detectives of character.
Absolutely.
They can seek out someone that's of fake,
Yes.
fraudulent, that don't care about them quicker than any psychologist. Children know instinctively whether or not you like them. And the younger they are, the quicker they can detect this from the very first day of class, from entering into that classroom. And so the most important thing we can teach our children is knowledge of self. Then we teach them the subject matter.
But now, when you think about where we came from, African American studies in the schools, the middle school, high school, elementary school, and even on into college, that's a new concept. When you really look back at when we were in school and growing up, and especially during that time of integration and where you had to be bused to another area, they weren't trying to teach everybody of self. There was just American history, and that American history did not include others.
Now, what I would like for you to do, and hopefully we can share again, I want to continue this same thought when we have an opportunity to do another show together. I want to continue that same thought. So remember your closing remarks. And I want to thank you for sharing in this hour with us in education in the community. And so to my audience, I want you to be on the lookout for a part 2 of this same show. And until then, we bid you farewell and do some personal research into your history. Start with book 1, book 2, book 3, book 4, etc., until you have a thorough understanding of who you are. And until next time, so long.